A pitched battle underway right now between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump for the support of military leaders, each now counting more than 100 retired generals and admirals in their camp after this week's Commander-in-Chief Forum. Mrs. Clinton taking a bold stance during that forum when it comes to American troops in Syria and Iraq. Listen.
They are not going to get ground troops. We are not putting ground troops into Iraq ever again, and we're not putting ground troops into Syria. We're going to defeat ISIS without committing American ground troops. So those are the kinds of decisions we have to make on a case-by-case basis.
And joining us now with a reaction, we have retired four-star General Wesley Clark, who is the former NATO Supreme Allied Commander, and he is endorsing Mrs. Clinton. Welcome, General. It's great to have you on the show today.
Thank you very much, Emma.
You know, you're part of a list that includes more than 100 military leaders backing Mrs. Clinton right now. And this week's Commander-in-Chief Forum gave Americans a snapshot on the differences between her and Donald Trump on the issues of national security. In that forum, she said she wanted to do more in Syria, but as we just heard, she said she opposes putting any U.S. ground troops in that country. However, most Americans know that we have ground troops on there, special forces, who are already fighting the Islamic State. She says she will combat ISIS with air power and regional alliances. Isn't that good news for ISIS and a mistake from the U.S. when she's already telling ISIS what she will or will not do to them?
Well, I see it a little differently. First of all, when she says ground troops, she is excluding special forces from that category. They're special forces. She's talking about regular infantry and armor divisions and battalions of artillery and so forth that come out of places like Fort Polk and Fort Hood. So I think the veterans all understood what she meant. And I think there's a strong rationale for this, because what we found is, and you can't just go in and put ground troops in. You've got to find out after you've run the enemy out, who is going to govern? What's the plan to really bring peace and stability to the region? Otherwise, ISIS just, they put on burqas, they hide in ditches, they run to other villages, you don't know who they are, you don't speak the language, and eventually you leave and you're back where you started. So we learned our lesson. We're not an army that's good for occupation in the Middle East and shouldn't try to do that. We've got to get our allies to do that. What we can do is provide them the combat multipliers. And that's what Hillary Clinton was explaining, and I think that's the right approach, and I think it's an approach that is actually working. And I think veterans do understand that.
And so you think it's good to, at this point, from her point of view, to continue to follow what President Obama has been doing up to this point in the fight against ISIS?
Well, I think that there are many twists and turns in the road, but right now the plan that makes sense is to use air power, put special forces in there to help direct it, train the allied forces, give them equipment, give them the combat multipliers they need, and let them do the hard work of going inside the villages, clearing rooms, talking to the population, and meanwhile work behind the scenes to set the conditions so that when they run ISIS out, there's a stable government that can provide services and stability and security for the people that want to come back and live in Syria.
So spell for me the difference then in the approach between her and President Obama then at this point in that fight against ISIS, because critics will say we haven't gained an advantage to this point where we actually see the enemy defeated.
Well, I think we've actually pushed the enemy back a long way. I think the Iraqi forces are going to have to do the bulk of the fighting to clear ISIS out of Mosul. They've already pushed ISIS out of a lot of the territory that it's held. Now, the Free Syrian Army and the other rebel groups we've supported, that's gone back and forth. It hasn't gone as cleanly as anyone would have wanted. But I dare say that if we had a bunch of American troops in there, what would have happened is we'd have overrun various villages, taken terrain, and then been left with a guerrilla warfare and improvised explosive devices that we're very familiar with. All through the area, and we'd end up with a commitment that we'd be struggling to get out of after we'd taken losses. So I think the approach that President Obama has crafted was the right approach for the time, and I think that Hillary Clinton will be very opportunistic in building on that approach and being just as effective or more effective to finish this fight against ISIS. She says she's going to do it. I believe her. She's a very determined person.
Let me ask you, were you at all troubled that Mrs. Clinton again expanded on her view that her support for the war in Iraq was a mistake before an audience of veterans, many of whom have served in Iraq? Many, of course, have been injured, saw their colleagues die in combat. Those folks went forward to serve their country and their commander-in-chief. Wouldn't it be more productive to simply say that moving ahead she would incorporate a different policy if faced with similar circumstances in the future, knowing what she knows now?
First of all, I'm very proud of the men and women that did serve in Iraq, because I served in Vietnam, and that was a very unpopular war, but I honor my colleagues who serve in all wars where the United States calls on our citizens to go and fight. And I know that Hillary does also. I think she took a lot of courage in that forum. And that was a question that Matt Lauer asked her, and she answered that question. And I think it took a lot of courage to say that. But I also say this to the men and women who fought in Iraq: got to learn lessons from the experience. Just as we have in Vietnam, the fact that we believe in each other, that we obey the orders of the commander-in-chief, that we're committed to the tasks that are assigned, doesn't mean that in the aftermath of the action we don't go back and learn lessons from it. And that's true at the tactical level, the strategic level, and the diplomatic, political level.
I know that you've been very critical of Donald Trump's remarks about conditional support for NATO if he is elected. You have been the former Supreme Allied Commander. What impact do you think his remarks are having on NATO allies right now who are concerned about whether a Trump presidency will support them in a crisis?
Well, the government leaders in these countries, in Eastern Europe and the Baltics and in Romania, Bulgaria, they're very concerned about Mr. Trump's comments, because they're afraid of something called Yalta II. He goes over and sees Mr. Putin, shakes hands, said, "Hey, you're a great leader." Putin says, "You're a great leader." They say, and Trump says, "Why can't we get along?" And Putin says, "We could. Just leave Eastern Europe to me. You don't understand these people. I'll take care of them. You can come over and build hotels if you want." And that kind of handshake frightens the Europeans to death. But it's not just that they're worried about it. They count on American support. And when a major candidate for the office of President of the United States indicates he may not be supporting them, it empowers all the people who, in their own political systems, have said, "I told you so, I told you so, Russia's strong, Russia's going to be here, better listen to Russia, they'll come in and kick us you know where." So it upsets the ongoing balance in the political structures even before the American election. So he's already having an impact. It's not a good impact, because when the politics in Eastern Europe starts turning that way, then investors don't put money in, the economies don't grow, and ordinary people suffer. So it's not a good thing.
General Clark, it's good to see you. Thank you so much for joining us with your insights. Really appreciate it.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
I think under the leadership of Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton, the generals have been reduced to rubble. They have been reduced to a point where it's embarrassing for our country.
That's Donald Trump at the Commander-in-Chief Forum, stepping into unexplored territory by seeming to